Yes, Daroga. I felt her tears flow on my forehead, on mine. They were soft, they were sweet. They trickled under my mask, they mingled with my tears in my eyes. Yes, they flowed between my lips. Listen, Daroga, listen to what I did. I tore off my mask so as not to lose one of her tears, and she did not run away. And she did not die. She remained alive, weeping over me, with me. We cried together. I have tasted all the happiness the world can offer. And Erik fell into a chair, choking for breath. Ah, I am not going to die yet. Presently I shall. But let me cry. Listen, Daroga. Listen to this. While I was at her feet, I heard her say, "Poor, unhappy Erik." And she took my hand. I had become no more, you know, than a poor dog ready to die for her. I mean it, Daroga. I held in my hand a ring, a plain gold ring which I had given her, which she had lost, and which I had found again, a wedding ring, you know. I slipped it into her little hand and said, "There. Take it for you, and him. It shall be my wedding present, a present from your poor, unhappy Erik. I know you love the boy. Don't cry any more." She asked me, in a very soft voice, what I meant. Then I made her understand that, where she was concerned, I was only a poor dog, ready to die for her, but that she could marry the young man when she pleased, because she had cried with me and mingled her tears with mine. Erik's emotion was so great that he had to tell the Persian not to look at him, for he was choking and must take off his mask. The Daroga went to the window and opened it. His heart was full of pity, but he took care to keep his eyes fixed on the trees in the Tuileries gardens, lest he should see the monster's face. I went and released the young man, Erik continued, and told him to come with me to Christine. They kissed before me in the Louis Philippe room. Christine had my ring. I made Christine swear to come back, one night, when I was dead, crossing the lake from the Rue Scribe side, and bury me in the greatest secrecy with the gold ring, which she was to wear until that moment. I told her where she would find my body and what to do with it. Hen Christine kissed me, for the first time, herself, here, on the forehead. Don't look, Daroga. Here, on the forehead. On my forehead, mine, don't look, Daroga. And they went off together. Christine had stopped crying. I alone cried. Daroga. If Christine keeps her promise, she will come back soon. The Persian asked him no questions. He was quite reassured as to the fate of Raoul Chagny and Christine Daaé. No one could have doubted the word of the weeping Erik that night. The monster resumed his mask and collected his strength to leave the Daroga. He told him that, when he felt his end to be very near at hand, he would send him, in gratitude for the kindness which the Persian had once shown him, that which he held dearest in the world, all Christine Daaé's papers, which she had written for Raoul's benefit and left with Erik, together with a few objects belonging to her, such as a pair of gloves, a shoe buckle and 2 pocket handkerchiefs. In reply to the Persian's questions, Erik told him that the 2 young people, as soon as they found themselves free, had resolved to go and look for a priest in some lonely spot where they could hide their happiness, and that, with this object in view, they had started from the northern railway station of the world. Lastly, Erik relied on the Persian, as soon as he received the promised relics and papers, to inform the young couple of his death and to advertise it in the Epoch. That was all. The Persian saw Erik to the door of his flat, and Darius helped him down to the street. A cab was waiting for him. Erik stepped in, and the Persian, who had gone back to the window, heard him say to the driver, "Go to the opera." And the cab drove off into the night. The Persian had seen the poor, unfortunate Erik for the last time. 3 weeks later, the Epoch published this advertisement. Erik is dead. Epilogue. I have now told the singular, but veracious story of the opera ghost. As I declared on the first page of this work, it is no longer possible to deny that Erik really lived. There are today so many proofs of his existence within the reach of everybody that we can follow Erik's actions logically through the whole tragedy of the Chagnys. There is no need to repeat here how greatly the case excited the capital. The kidnapping of the artist, the death of the Comte de Chagny under such exceptional conditions, the disappearance of his brother, the drugging of the gas man at the opera and of his 2 assistants. What tragedies, what passions, what crimes had surrounded the idyll of Raoul and the sweet and charming Christine? What had become of that wonderful, mysterious artist of whom the world was never to hear again? She was represented as the victim of a rivalry between the 2 brothers, and nobody suspected what had really happened. Nobody understood that, as Raoul and Christine had both disappeared, Both had withdrawn far from the world to enjoy a happiness which they would not have cared to make public after the inexplicable death of Count Philippe. They took the train one day from the northern railway station of the world. Possibly, I too shall take the train at that station, one day, and go and seek around thy lakes, O Norway, O silent Scandinavia, for the perhaps still living traces of Raoul and Christine, and also of Mamma Valerius, who disappeared at the same time. Possibly, some day, I shall hear the lonely echoes of the north repeat the singing of her who knew the angel of music. Long after the case was pigeonholed by the unintelligent care of M. Le Jugé d'Instruction Foray, the newspapers made efforts, at intervals, to fathom the mystery. One evening paper alone, which knew all the gossip of the theatres, said, "We recognize the touch of the opera ghost." And even that was written by way of irony. The Persian alone knew the whole truth and held the main proofs, which came to him with the pious relics promised by the ghost. It fell to my lot to complete those proofs with the aid of the daroga himself. Day by day, I kept him informed of the progress of my inquiries, and he directed them. He had not been to the opera for years and years, but he had preserved the most accurate recollection of the building, and there was no better guide than he possible to help me discover its most secret recesses. He also told me where to gather further information, whom to ask, and he sent me to call on M. Poligny, at a moment when the poor man was nearly drawing his last breath. I had no idea that he was so very ill, and I shall never forget the effect which my questions about the ghost produced upon him. He looked at me as if I were the devil and answered only in a few incoherent sentences, which showed, however, and that was the main thing, the extent of the perturbation which O.G., in his time, had brought into that already very restless life, for M. Poligny was what people call a man of pleasure. When I came and told the Persian of the poor result of my visit to M. Poligny, the daroga gave a faint smile and said, "Poligny never knew how far that extraordinary blackguard of an Erik humbugged him." The Persian, by the way, spoke of Erik sometimes as a demigod and sometimes as the lowest of the low. Poligny was superstitious and Erik knew it. Erik knew most things about the public and private affairs of the opera. When M. Poligny heard a mysterious voice tell him, in box 5, of the manner in which he used to spend his time and abuse his partner's confidence, he did not wait to hear any more. Thinking at first that it was a voice from heaven, he believed himself damned, and then, when the voice began to ask for money, he saw that he was being victimized by a shrewd blackmailer to whom de Bien himself had fallen a prey. Both of them, already tired of management for various reasons, went away without trying to investigate further into the personality of that curious O.G., who had forced such a singular memorandum book upon them. They bequeathed the whole mystery to their successors and heaved a sigh of relief when they were rid of a business that had puzzled them without amusing them in the least. I then spoke of the two successes and expressed my surprise that, in his Memoirs of a Manager, M. Moncharmin should describe the opera ghost's behavior at such length in the first part of the book and hardly mention it at all in the second. In reply to this, the Persian, who knew the memoirs as thoroughly as if he had written them himself, observed that I should find the explanation of the whole business if I would just recollect the few lines which Moncharmin devotes to the ghost in the second part aforesaid. I quote these lines, which are particularly interesting because they describe the very simple manner in which the famous incident of the 20,000 francs was closed. As for O.G., some of whose curious tricks I have related in the first part of my memoirs, I will only say that he redeemed by one spontaneous fine action all the worry which he had caused my dear friend and partner and, I am bound to say, myself. He felt, no doubt, that there are limits to a joke, especially when it is so expensive and when the commissary of police has been informed, for, at the moment when we had made an appointment in our office with M. Freud to tell him the whole story, a few days after the disappearance of Christine Daaé, we found, on Richard's table, a large envelope, inscribed, in red ink, with compliments of O.G. It contained the large sum of money which he had succeeded in playfully extracting, for the time being, from the treasury. Richard was at once of the opinion that we must be content with that and drop the business. I agreed with Richard. All's well that ends well. What do you say, O.G.? Of course, Moncharmin, especially after the money had been restored, continued to believe that he had, for a short while, been the butt of Richard's sense of humor, whereas Richard, on his side, was convinced that Moncharmin had amused himself by inventing the whole of the affair of the opera ghost, in order to revenge himself for a few jokes. I asked the Persian to tell me by what trick the ghost had taken 20,000 francs from Richard's pocket in spite of the safety pin. He replied that he had not gone into this little detail, but that, if I myself cared to make an investigation on the spot, I should certainly find the solution to the riddle in the manager's office by remembering that Erik had not been nicknamed the trapdoor lover for nothing. I promised the Persian to do so as soon as I had time, and I may as well tell the reader at once that the results of my investigation were perfectly satisfactory, and I hardly believed that I should ever discover so many undeniable proofs of the authenticity of the feats ascribed to the ghost.